The knife was already on the table when Elena Voss walked into her father's study, and she knew before anyone said a word that her family's life was about to end or change forever. Her father sat behind his desk, his face gray, his hands shaking around a cup of tea he was not drinking. Across from him stood a man Elena had never met, tall and still, wearing a dark coat that seemed to swallow the light in the room. His eyes found her the moment she stepped inside, and something in her chest tightened, like a rope pulled too fast. "Elena," her father said, his voice cracking on her name. "Come in, sit down." She did not sit. She could feel danger in the air, the way animals feel a storm before the clouds appear. "Who is this?" she asked. "My name is Damien Blackwood," the man said, before her father could answer. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to be obeyed. "I believe your father has something that belongs to my family." Elena's stomach dropped. She had heard the name Blackwood whispered in the village more than once, always in fear, always followed by silence. The Blackwoods were not an ordinary family. They ran the Northern Territory the way kings once ran kingdoms, and everyone who lived within its borders answered to them, whether they wanted to or not. "Papa," Elena said carefully, "what is he talking about?" Her father would not meet her eyes. "I borrowed money," he whispered. "A long time ago. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. I was wrong." "How much?" Elena asked. Damien answered instead of her father, and the number he said was so large that Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. It was not just money. It was land, debts stacked on debts, favors called in from dangerous men, promises broken over years. Her father had been drowning in secret for a long time, and none of them had known. "There is no way we can pay this," Elena said, forcing her voice to stay steady even as her heart pounded. "Not in 10 lifetimes." "I am aware," Damien said. He did not sound cruel. He sounded like a man stating a simple fact, the way someone might say that winter follows autumn. "Which is why I have come to offer a solution, rather than send men to collect what is owed in other ways." Elena felt cold all over. She had heard stories about what happened to families who could not pay the Blackwoods. Some left the territory in the night, and were never seen again. Some simply disappeared, and no one dared ask what became of them. "What solution?" she asked, though some part of her already feared the answer. Damien's gaze moved to her, slow and deliberate, studying her face, as if he were reading a page in a book he had already decided to buy. "Marry me," he said, "and your family's debt is forgiven. Every coin, every acre of land, gone, as if it never existed." The room went silent except for the sound of Elena's own breathing. She looked at her father, hoping he would object, hoping he would say this was some terrible joke, but he only stared at his hands, ashamed and defeated. Her younger brother, Henry, was somewhere upstairs, likely doing his schoolwork, unaware that his entire future was being decided in a room below him. "You don't even know me," Elena said. "I don't need to know you to make you an offer," Damien said. "I need a wife. Your father needs his debt erased. It solves 2 problems at once. And if I say no?" For the first time, something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked almost like a warning wrapped in patience. "Then I will collect what is owed the way I collect from everyone else who cannot pay," he said quietly. "And your family will lose everything they have left, your father's business, this house, possibly more than that." Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that people were not things to be traded like property, that her life was not a coin to settle someone else's debt. But she looked at her father's trembling hands, and she thought of Henry upstairs, innocent and unaware, and she thought of her mother in the next room, who had been sick for months, and needed medicine they could barely afford even before this debt existed. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until tomorrow morning," Damien said, rising from his chair. He was even taller standing than he had seemed sitting down, and when he moved, there was something unusual about him, a quiet power in the way he carried himself, like a predator that had long ago learned to walk among people without frightening them. "I would encourage you to think carefully, Miss Voss. I am not a man who enjoys repeating himself." He left without another word, and the door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. For a long moment, Neither Elena nor her father spoke. Then her father broke down, apologizing over and over, telling her about the mistakes he had made years ago, business deals that had gone wrong, a partner who had cheated him and left him holding debts that were never his to begin with. He had borrowed from the Blackwoods because no one else would lend to him, and he had told himself he would pay it back before anyone found out how deep the hole had become. "I never wanted this for you," he said, his voice breaking. "I would rather lose everything than force you into this." But Elena already knew there was no real choice. If they lost everything, her mother would have no medicine, no roof, no safety. Henry would grow up with nothing, and the shame of it would follow her father to his grave. She thought of the family she had, imperfect and struggling but hers, and she thought of the alternative Damien Blackwood had offered, cold as it was. That night, Elena barely slept. She sat by her window, watching the dark shapes of the trees at the edge of the property, thinking about the man who had walked into her home and rearranged her entire future in the space of 10 minutes. She did not know anything about him except his name and the fear it caused in others. She did not know if he was cruel or simply practical, if he would treat her as a wife or as a possession he had purchased to settle a debt. By morning, she had made her decision, though it felt less like choosing and more like accepting the only door left open to her. When Damien returned, exactly as the sun rose over the hills, Elena was waiting for him at the door before he even knocked. She did not invite him inside. She simply looked at him and said, "I will marry you, but I want promises in return." A faint, almost curious expression crossed his face, as if he had not expected her to negotiate. "Go on," he said. "My family keeps their home," Elena said. "My mother receives proper medical care. My brother continues his education without interruption. And you never use my family against me again, no matter what happens between us." Damien studied her for a long moment, and something in his gaze seemed to soften, just slightly, like a crack of light through a closed curtain. "Agreed," he said. "You have my word." "Word from a stranger means very little," Elena said. "Then you will simply have to learn whether my word is worth anything," Damien replied, and for the first time, there was the faintest suggestion of a smile at the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. The wedding, when it came only days later, was nothing like Elena had imagined for herself as a girl. There were no flowers gathered from the fields, no long guest list of friends and neighbors, no laughter echoing through a decorated hall. It was a quiet ceremony, held in a stone chapel on Blackwood land, attended by a small handful of serious-looking men and women who watched Elena with expressions she could not quite read. Some looked at her with pity. Others looked at her the way one might look at a new piece of furniture being placed in a familiar room, assessing whether it belonged. Elena wore a simple pale dress her mother had altered from an old gown, and she stood beside Damien in front of an old priest, who spoke words she barely absorbed. Her father cried quietly in the front row, not from joy but from a guilt he could not hide. Henry sat beside him, confused by the seriousness of the day, too young to fully understand what his sister was giving up to protect them. When it was over, when the papers were signed and the debt officially erased, Elena felt strangely hollow, as if she had traded away a version of her life she would never get back, no matter what happened next. She looked at the man who was now her husband, a man whose full name she had known for less than a week, and wondered what she had truly agreed to. Damien offered his arm as they walked out of the chapel, and though Elena hesitated, she took it, aware of every eye on them. "You do not have to be afraid of me," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I am not afraid," Elena lied. "Good," he said, though something in his tone suggested he knew better. "Because there will be enough to fear later, without adding me to that list." Elena turned to ask him what he meant, but he was already looking ahead, his jaw tight, his eyes distant, as if he had said more than he intended to. She filed the strange comment away in her mind, one more small piece of a puzzle she did not yet know she was trying to solve. The carriage ride to the Blackwood estate took nearly 2 hours, winding through roads that grew narrower and darker as the forest closed in around them. Elena watched the trees pass in silence, her new husband seated across from her, equally quiet, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the window that she could not see. She wanted to ask him 100 questions. Why had he chosen marriage instead of simply forcing her family to pay in some other way? Why had he looked at her the way he did in her father's study? like he already knew something about her future that she did not. Why had the guests at the wedding watched her with such strange, careful sympathy? But every time she opened her mouth to speak, something in his posture, some quiet tension in his shoulders, made her close it again. When the estate finally came into view, Elena's breath caught despite herself. It was enormous, built of dark stone with tall windows and towers that seemed to disappear into the low clouds. Thick forest surrounded it on every side, so dense that the road seemed to vanish the moment it entered the trees. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, built to keep something out, or perhaps, Elena thought with a small shiver, to keep something in. Servants and pack members lined the entrance as the carriage arrived, and Elena felt the weight of their stares even before she stepped down. A tall woman with sharp eyes and gray-streaked hair stepped forward first, offering a stiff bow of her head. "Welcome home, Alpha," she said to Damien, then turned her gaze to Elena, studying her the way one might study a stranger who had wandered into a place they did not belong. "And welcome, Elena." "Thank you," Elena said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. As she was led inside, past long hallways lined with old portraits and dark wooden doors, Elena noticed the way people watched her when they thought she wasn't looking. Not with hostility exactly, but with something more complicated. Curiosity, concern. In one man's eyes, as she passed him near the stairs, she thought she saw something that looked almost like pity, quickly hidden behind a polite nod. She told herself she was imagining things, that the exhaustion of the day was playing tricks on her mind. But that night, lying alone in a grand bedroom she did not yet think of as hers, listening to the wind move through trees she could not see, Elena could not shake the feeling that she had walked into a story that had already been written long before she arrived, and that everyone around her knew the ending except for her. She thought of her mother's tired smile when she'd learned the medicine would finally come. She thought of Henry's confused, grateful eyes. She thought of her father, who had aged 10 years in a single week from the weight of his own mistakes. Whatever waited for her inside these walls, whatever secrets the Blackwood family kept behind their careful politeness, she had made her choice for people she loved, and she would not regret it. But as sleep finally pulled her under, one thought lingered stubbornly at the edge of her mind, refusing to let her rest completely. "There will be enough to fear later, without adding me to that list." What, exactly, was there to fear? Morning light came through the tall windows in soft gray streaks, and for a moment, Elena forgot where she was. Then the unfamiliar shape of the room settled around her, the heavy curtains, the carved wooden furniture, the silence so complete it felt like being underwater, and she remembered. She was a married woman now, living in a house that belonged to a man she barely knew, in a family that watched her like she was a puzzle they had not yet solved. She dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway, unsure where to go. The estate was enormous, a maze of corridors and staircases that all seemed to look alike. Dark wood and cold stone softened only by the occasional tapestry or portrait of a stern-faced ancestor. She walked until she found a staircase leading down, and followed the sound of voices toward what she hoped was a kitchen or a dining room. She found Damien instead, standing near a large window in a room lined with books, deep in quiet conversation with the sharp-eyed woman from the day before. They stopped talking the moment they noticed her, and Elena felt her cheeks warm, aware that she had likely interrupted something private. "Good morning," Damien said, his tone polite but unreadable. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," Elena said, though it wasn't entirely true. "I was hoping to find breakfast." "Grace will show you," Damien said, nodding toward the older woman. "She manages the household. If you need anything at all, she is the one to ask." Grace offered a thin smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "This way, dear," she said, and Elena followed her out of the room, aware of Damien's gaze on her back, until the door closed behind them. Grace led her through the halls with brisk efficiency, pointing out rooms as they passed. The dining hall, the sitting room, the library, which Elena was told she was welcome to use whenever she liked. But as they continued down a long corridor on the east side of the house, Grace's pace slowed, and her voice took on a different tone. "This wing is not open to you," she said, gesturing toward a set of heavy double doors at the end of the hall. "The Alpha has asked that no one enter without his permission. Not staff, not family, no one." "Why not?" Elena asked, curiosity pricking at her despite herself. "It is simply the rule of this house," Grace said, in a voice that made it clear the subject was closed. "You will find there are several rules here that may seem unusual to someone unfamiliar with our ways. It is easier for everyone if you follow them without asking too many questions." Elena wanted to push further, but something in Grace's expression, a flicker of caution beneath the polite mask, told her this was not the moment. She let the matter drop, though she filed the image of those closed doors away in her mind, the same way she had filed away Damien's strange words from the carriage. Breakfast was a quiet affair, taken alone at a long table that could easily have seated 20 people. Elena picked at her food, listening to the sounds of the house around her. Footsteps in distant hallways, muffled voices she could not quite make out, the occasional creak of old wood settling. She had grown up in a small home where every sound was familiar, every corner known. Here, everything felt foreign. Every noise, a small mystery she did not yet have the tools to solve. Later that day, Damien found her in the library, standing before a shelf of old books with unfamiliar titles. He entered quietly, and she only noticed him when his shadow fell across the page she was reading. "Do you enjoy reading?" he asked. "I do," Elena said, closing the book gently. "Though these are not titles I recognize. Are they about your family's history?" Something flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Some of them," he said. "Old records. Nothing that would interest you." "You'd be surprised what interests me," Elena said, watching him carefully. He held her gaze for a long moment, and for the first time since they had met, she saw something beneath his careful composure, something that looked almost like uncertainty. "There is a bracelet I would like you to wear," he said finally, changing the subject in a way that felt deliberate. He produced a small box from his coat and opened it to reveal a delicate silver bracelet, simple in design but heavier than it looked, etched with symbols Elena did not recognize. "What is it?" she asked. "A gift," Damien said, "and a request. I would ask that you wear it always and never remove it, for any reason." Elena frowned, turning the bracelet over in her hands. It was beautiful in its own strange way, but something about the weight of it, the seriousness in Damien's voice, made her uneasy. "That's a strange request for a gift," she said. "Perhaps," Damien admitted, "but it matters to me a great deal. Will you wear it?" She studied his face, searching for some sign of what this really meant, but his expression gave nothing away. Still, she thought of the promise she had made, to try to build something workable out of this strange marriage, and she thought of the debt he had erased, the medicine her mother now received, the future her brother still had because of the choice she had made. "All right," she said, and let him fasten it around her wrist. The metal was cool against her skin, and for a moment, she thought she felt something strange pass through her, a faint hum, gone as quickly as it came. She told herself it was nothing, simply the newness of the object, the strangeness of the day. Over the following days, Elena began to notice more rules, small at first, then harder to ignore. She was never to walk in the forest surrounding the estate after dark, under any circumstances. She was to avoid the eastern wing entirely. She was never to remove the bracelet, not to bathe, not to sleep, not for any reason at all. When she asked why, the answers she received were always vague, always deflecting, always ending the conversation before it truly began. "It is simply safer this way," Damien told her one evening, when she pressed him about the forest. "Safer from what?" she asked. "There are wolves in these woods," he said, which was technically true, though Elena had the strange sense that he was not telling her the whole truth, that the wolves he meant were not entirely the kind she imagined when she pictured wild animals in dark trees. She began paying closer attention to the pack members who moved through the estate, the way they seemed to organize themselves with military precision, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, the way certain members watched her with expressions that shifted between curiosity and something that looked uncomfortably like sorrow. There was a man named Marcus, tall and serious, who seemed to hold a position of authority second only to Damien himself. He watched Elena more closely than anyone else, and whenever their eyes met, he looked away quickly, as though caught doing something he shouldn't. One afternoon, Elena found herself walking past a small sitting room where several pack members had gathered, unaware that she was near. She paused when she heard her own name mentioned, and though she knew it was not polite to listen, Curiosity got the better of her. Still can't believe he actually married her, one voice said, low and hushed. He didn't have a choice, another voice answered. Not really. Not with the timeline the way it is. It's not fair to her, a third voice said, quieter than the others. She doesn't even know what she agreed to. None of them ever do, the first voice said, with something heavy in the words. Something that sounded almost like grief. That's rather the point. Elena's heart began to pound. She wanted to step into the room and demand to know what they meant, but before she could move, footsteps approached from the other direction, and she quickly ducked into a side hallway, her mind racing. None of them ever do. What did that mean? None of who? Had there been other women in this house before her? Other brides who had walked these same halls, worn similar bracelets, been kept from the same forbidden wing? That night, Elena lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the ceiling, turning the overheard conversation over and over in her mind. She thought about the strange bracelet on her wrist, heavier now than it had felt that first day. She thought about the closed doors at the end of the east wing, and the way Grace's voice had tightened when she mentioned them. She thought about Damien's words in the carriage, the ones that still echoed in her mind whenever the house grew silent. There will be enough to fear later, without adding me to that list. She was beginning to understand that her new husband was not simply a powerful, distant man who had married her out of practicality. There was something else happening in this house, something old and carefully hidden, something that involved her directly, whether she understood it or not. And whatever it was, it seemed that everyone in this house knew about it except for her. Elena had made a promise to herself the day she agreed to this marriage, that she would not simply be a quiet, obedient piece, moved around a chessboard she did not understand. She had given her freedom to protect the people she loved, but she had not given up her mind, or her will to know the truth. Whatever secret lived behind those closed doors, whatever fate the whispers in that sitting room had hinted at, she promised herself she would find it. No matter what it cost her to learn it. Weeks passed, and Elena settled into a strange rhythm within the walls of Blackwood Estate, a rhythm built on politeness and distance, on careful conversations that never quite reached the truth she was searching for. Damien was not unkind to her. If anything, he seemed to go out of his way to make her comfortable, arranging for books she might enjoy, asking after her family's well-being, ensuring her mother's medicine arrived without fail each month. But beneath his careful attention, Elena always sensed a wall, something he kept firmly closed off, no matter how many small moments of warmth passed between them. She began to notice him watching her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, an expression on his face she couldn't quite name. Not affection exactly, though there was something close to it, something closer to guilt, or grief, or both tangled together in a way that made her chest ache without knowing why. One evening, after a quiet dinner shared mostly in silence, Damien surprised her by asking if she would like to walk with him through the gardens before the sun fully set. Elena agreed, curious despite herself, and they walked together along a stone path lined with old rose bushes, their thorns bare in the cooling autumn air. "You've been asking a great many questions," Damien said, after a long stretch of comfortable silence. "Grace has mentioned it to me." Elena felt a flicker of embarrassment, though she refused to apologize for her curiosity. "I live in a house full of rules I don't understand," she said. "Forgive me for wanting to understand my own home." "There is nothing to forgive," Damien said, surprising her. "I would likely do the same, if our positions were reversed." "Then why won't you simply tell me the truth?" Elena asked, stopping to face him directly. "Whatever it is you're keeping from me, I would rather know it plainly than piece it together from whispers and closed doors." For a long moment, Damien said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes distant in the fading light. "It is complicated," he said finally. "There are things about my family, about this pack, that are difficult to explain to someone who was not raised within it." "Try me," Elena said. He studied her for a long moment, and Elena thought, just for a heartbeat, that he might actually tell her. But then something shifted in his expression, some decision made, and immediately regretted, and the wall came back up, firmer than before. "Not yet," he said quietly. "Please, Elena, trust me a little longer." "Trust is difficult to give to someone who won't be honest with me," Elena said, though her voice had softened, some part of her responding to the genuine pain she saw flicker across his face. "I know," Damien said. "I am asking anyway." They continued walking in silence after that, and though Elena's questions remained unanswered, something had shifted between them that evening, a small crack in the careful distance they had maintained since their wedding day. She found herself watching him differently after that, noticing the tired lines around his eyes, the weight he seemed to carry in his shoulders, as though he were constantly holding something back that exhausted him to keep contained. Over the following weeks, their careful politeness began to soften into something that resembled real companionship. Damien began joining her for breakfast rather than leaving her to eat alone. He asked her opinion on matters of the estate, small decisions about the household, and seemed to genuinely value her thoughts rather than simply humoring her. Elena found herself laughing more easily in his presence, surprised by a dry sense of humor he kept carefully hidden beneath his serious exterior. One afternoon, while Elena was walking near the edge of the property, a pack member she did not recognize approached her too quickly, his expression aggressive, in a way that made her instinctively step back. Before she could react further, Damien appeared as though from nowhere, placing himself between her and the stranger, with a low, commanding voice that made the other man immediately lower his eyes and retreat. "Are you all right?" Damien asked, turning to her, his hands gently checking that she was unharmed. "I'm fine," Elena said, startled by the sudden protectiveness in his voice. "What was that about?" "A misunderstanding," Damien said, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. "It will not happen again." Later that evening, Elena learned from one of the kitchen staff that the man had recently lost a challenge for position within the pack and had been in a foul temper for days. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it reminded Elena that the world she now lived in operated by rules very different from the ones she had grown up with, rules involving hierarchy and strength, and challenges she did not fully understand. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Elena found herself growing more comfortable in Damien's presence, more willing to lower her guard around him, even as her curiosity about the house's secrets never fully faded. There were nights when they sat together in the library, long after the household had gone quiet, talking about small things, her childhood, his early years learning to lead the pack, books they had both read and loved. In those quiet moments, it became easy to forget the strange rules, the whispered conversations, the closed doors at the end of the East Wing. But the questions always returned eventually, usually late at night, when Elena lay awake staring at the bracelet on her wrist, wondering what it truly meant, wondering why Marcus watched her with such careful sorrow, wondering what secret lived behind those forbidden doors that seemed to weigh so heavily on everyone around her. One night, unable to sleep, Elena wandered down to the library, hoping a book might help quiet her restless mind. She found Damien there already, sitting alone by the fireplace, an old leather book open on his lap, his expression distant and troubled in the flickering light. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly, announcing her presence before she stepped further into the room. Damien looked up, startled, and quickly closed the book, though not before Elena caught a glimpse of old handwritten pages, filled with symbols similar to the ones etched into her bracelet. "Elena," he said, his voice tighter than usual. "I didn't expect you. What are you reading?" she asked, moving closer despite the tension in his posture. "Nothing important," Damien said, setting the book aside, though Elena noticed the careful way he positioned it, cover down, as though hiding the title from her view. "You keep saying that," Elena said, sitting across from him, studying his face in the firelight. "Nothing important, nothing that would interest you. And yet you look at me sometimes like you're carrying the weight of something enormous, something you desperately want to tell me but won't." Damien's expression cracked, just slightly, the careful composure he wore like armor slipping for one unguarded moment. "There are things I wish I could tell you," he admitted quietly. "Things I should have told you before we married, if I am being honest with myself. But I was afraid, Elena. Afraid that if you knew everything, you would never have agreed to any of this, and your family would have lost everything." Elena's heart pounded. "Tell me now," she said. "Please, Damien. Whatever it is, I would rather know." He looked at her for a long moment, torn between two choices she could see warring behind his eyes. Finally, he shook his head, though it seemed to cost him something to do it. "Not tonight," he said. "There are things I need to sort through first, on my own, before I bring you into it. I promise you, Elena, I will tell you everything, just not yet." Frustration rose in Elena's chest, But beneath it, something softer stirred as well, a recognition that whatever burden Damien carried, it clearly caused him real pain to keep hidden. "You keep asking me to trust you," she said quietly. "But trust has to go both ways, Damien. I have given you my life. The least you owe me is honesty." "I know," Damien said, his voice rough with something that sounded almost like regret. "And I will give it to you. I swear it. Just give me a little more time." Elena wanted to push further, to demand answers right then and there, but the raw vulnerability in his expression stopped her. She recognized, in that moment, a man who was not simply keeping secrets out of cruelty or control, but out of some deep fear she did not yet understand. Whatever waited behind those closed doors, whatever the old book with its strange symbols truly meant, it seemed to frighten Damien as much as the uncertainty frightened her. She nodded slowly, though the ache of unanswered questions remained heavy in her chest. "All right," she said. "But not forever, Damien. I need to know eventually." "You will," he said. "I promise you that." They sat together in silence after that, the fire slowly dying down between them, and though neither spoke further, something had passed between them that night, an unspoken understanding that whatever secret waited in the shadows of this house, they would eventually have to face it together. As Elena finally returned to her room, much later that night, she paused outside the east wing doors, staring at the heavy wood, the old iron handles, the silence that seemed to radiate from behind them like a held breath. She placed her palm gently against the door, half expecting to feel something, some confirmation of the fear that had been building inside her for weeks. Nothing happened. The door remained simply a door, cold and unmoving beneath her hand. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something she had missed before, in all her previous visits to this hallway. A thin line of light beneath the door, faint but unmistakable, as though someone, or something, waited on the other side. Elena stepped back quickly, her heart hammering, and hurried to her room without looking back, the image of that faint light burning behind her closed eyes, long after she finally managed to fall asleep. The following morning, Elena woke with the memory of the light beneath the door still fresh in her mind, and she found herself unable to focus on anything else. She moved through her usual routine mechanically, eating breakfast without tasting it, nodding along to Grace's instructions about the day's household matters without truly hearing them. Her thoughts kept returning to that thin strip of golden light, and the question it raised, one that refused to leave her alone. If the East Wing was truly empty, forbidden simply out of some old family tradition, why would there be light burning behind its doors in the middle of the night? She considered asking Damien directly, but she had promised him time, and some stubborn part of her wanted to discover the truth on her own terms, rather than wait for a confession that might never fully come. She began paying closer attention to the patterns of the house, watching when servants moved through the halls, when Damien left for pack business that kept him away for hours at a time, when the estate grew quiet enough that she might slip through hallways unnoticed. Her opportunity came nearly a week later, when Damien was called away to settle a dispute between neighboring packs, a matter that Grace explained would keep him occupied for the better part of the day. Elena waited until the household had settled into its usual afternoon rhythm, staff occupied with chores, Grace overseeing preparations in the kitchen, before she made her way toward the East Wing, her heart pounding with every step. The heavy doors were locked, as she expected, but Elena had spent the past week quietly observing where the household kept its various keys, and she had noticed, almost by accident, an old iron key hanging on a hook in a rarely used supply closet, unlabeled but clearly old enough to match the ancient locks throughout the estate. She retrieved it now, her hands trembling slightly as she fitted into the lock, half expecting it not to work. It turned smoothly, the mechanism clicking open, with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet hallway. Elena hesitated for only a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. The East Wing was nothing like she had imagined. Rather than the dark, forbidding space her mind had conjured over weeks of speculation, she found herself in a long hallway lined with old portraits, similar to the ones throughout the rest of the house, though these seemed older, their frames more worn, the faces within them staring out with an intensity that made Elena's skin prickle uncomfortably. She moved slowly down the hallway, studying each portrait as she passed. They appeared to be women, one after another, dressed in styles that shifted subtly with each frame, suggesting they spanned many years, perhaps even generations. Beneath each portrait, a small brass plaque bore a name and 2 dates, and as Elena examined them more closely, a cold dread began to settle into her stomach. Every single date range ended less than 1 year after it began. She moved faster now, counting the portraits, reading the names beneath trembling fingers. Margaret Blackwood, Eleanor Blackwood, Charlotte Blackwood. Each woman young, each captured in careful formal poses, each with the same haunting quality in their painted eyes, as though they had known something terrible was coming, even as the artist worked to preserve their likeness. At the end of the hallway, Elena found a door slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see the source of the light she had noticed the night before, a single lamp burning atop an old wooden desk in what appeared to be a study or private office. She pushed the door open carefully and stepped inside, her breath catching at what she found. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with old books similar to the one Damien had been reading by the fireplace, their spines cracked with age, their titles written in a language Elena did not recognize. On the desk itself sat several open volumes, along with pages of handwritten notes in Damien's careful script, dates and calculations she could not immediately understand. She approached the desk slowly, drawn despite the fear pooling in her stomach, and began to read. The notes referenced something called the Binding Pact, a phrase that appeared over and over throughout the pages, along with references to bloodlines, sacrifice, and something described only as the renewal, always followed by a date that made Elena's blood run cold when she finally understood its significance. 1 year from her wedding day. She continued reading, piecing together fragments of information from scattered notes and old book passages, her hands shaking harder with every page she turned. The Blackwood family, it seemed, had made an ancient agreement generations ago, a pact that granted the family's alpha bloodline extraordinary strength and power, strength that sustained not just the alpha himself, but the entire pack under his protection. But such power required a price, paid once each generation, through the life of a human bride bound to the alpha through marriage. Elena's stomach turned as she read further, understanding now the meaning behind the portraits in the hallway, the haunting pattern of dates that never extended beyond a single year. Every Blackwood alpha, it seemed, for generations, had married a human woman specifically for this purpose, though the notes suggested some had chosen their brides more carefully than others, some clearly out of genuine affection despite the terrible fate that awaited them, others with the same cold calculation that had characterized her own father's meeting with Damien months earlier. She found herself searching desperately through the pages for any indication that this might not apply to her, any hint that Damien intended something different, but the notes in his own handwriting made it painfully clear that he had been researching the exact mechanics of the ritual, calculating dates and requirements with the same careful precision he seemed to apply to everything in his life. Tears blurred Elena's vision as she read the final page she could bring herself to look at, a passage describing the ritual itself, the binding of the bracelet, the role it played in preparing the bride's life force for the transfer that would occur on the appointed date. She understood now why Damien had insisted she never remove it, why he had watched her with such careful, guilty sorrow since the day they married. She had not married a man who wished to build a life with her. She had married the instrument of her own eventual sacrifice. Elena stumbled backward from the desk, her hand pressed against her mouth, to stifle the sound that threatened to escape her. Horror and betrayal crashing over her in waves so powerful she could barely stand. She thought of every kind word Damien had spoken to her, every gentle moment they had shared over the past weeks, and wondered now how much of it had been genuine, and how much had simply been the careful management of livestock being prepared for slaughter. She needed to leave the room, needed air, needed to think clearly, away from the crushing weight of what she had just discovered. She turned toward the door, her vision still blurred with tears, and nearly collided with someone standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression of pure devastation. "Marcus, you shouldn't be in here," he said quietly, though there was no real force behind the words, only a tired resignation, as though he had known this moment would eventually come. "You knew," Elena said, her voice breaking. "You all knew, from the very beginning, what would happen to me." Marcus's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes filled with a guilt that mirrored everything Elena had seen in Damien's expression over the past weeks. "It is the way things have always been done," he said finally. long before either of us were born. It is not something any of us chose freely, Elena. It is simply the price our family has paid, generation after generation, to keep the pack strong and protected. And no one thought to tell me? Elena demanded, anger beginning to burn through her shock and grief. No one thought I deserved to know what I was truly agreeing to. Damien wanted to tell you, Marcus said quietly. He has fought against this more than any alpha before him, more than you could possibly know. He has spent months searching for another way, some alternative that would spare you the fate every bride before you has faced. I believe that is part of why he has kept this from you. He did not want to burden you with a truth he was still desperately hoping to change. Elena wanted to believe him, some small, desperate part of her heart clinging to the possibility that Damien's affection had been real, that his hesitation had come from love rather than simple guilt. But the betrayal cut too deep, the fear too overwhelming, for her to fully trust anything in this house any longer. I need to leave, she said, pushing past Marcus toward the door. Elena, please, Marcus said, following her into the hallway. Let me explain further. Let Damien explain when he returns. There is more to this than you understand yet. But Elena was already moving, half running now through the unfamiliar corridors of the East Wing, her mind consumed with a single overwhelming thought. She had married a man to save her family from one kind of danger, only to discover she had walked directly into another, far more deadly than she could have ever imagined. And the man she had begun, foolishly, to fall for, was the very architect of the fate now hanging over her life, like a blade waiting to fall. Elena did not stop moving until she reached her own room, where she locked the door behind her with shaking hands, and sank to the floor, her back against the cold wood, her mind spinning too fast to hold a single coherent thought. She stared at the bracelet on her wrist, the delicate silver that had felt like a gift only weeks ago, now heavy with the weight of everything it truly represented. She wanted to tear it from her skin, to throw it across the room, but some instinct, some fear of what removing it might trigger, kept her hands still. She did not know how long she sat there, replaying every conversation she had shared with Damien since their wedding day, searching for clues she might have missed, warnings she had failed to recognize. His strange comment in the carriage, his insistence that she never remove the bracelet, his careful avoidance of every question about the family's true history. It had all been there, hidden in plain sight, and she had been too consumed by her own fear and loneliness to see it clearly. Grace found her hours later, knocking softly on the door, her voice gentle, in a way Elena had not heard from her before. Elena, dear, are you all right? You missed the evening meal. Elena did not answer at first, unsure whether she could trust her own voice not to break the moment she opened her mouth. Finally, she rose from the floor and unlocked the door, though she remained standing in the doorway rather than inviting the older woman inside. Grace's expression shifted the moment she saw Elena's face, understanding dawning behind her sharp eyes. You found the East Wing, she said quietly. It was not a question. You could have told me, Elena said, her voice hoarse. Any of you could have told me the truth before I agreed to any of this. It was not my place, Grace said, though there was genuine sorrow in her voice. The Alpha's private matters are not mine to reveal, no matter how much I might wish otherwise. Did you know the others? Elena asked. The women in the portraits? Grace's expression tightened with old grief. Some of them, she said quietly. I have served this family for a very long time, Elena. I have watched this pattern repeat more times than I care to remember. Each time, I hoped the current Alpha might find another way. Each time, I was disappointed. But not this time? Elena asked, latching onto the small hope in Grace's careful wording. Grace hesitated, glancing down the hallway, as though checking they were truly alone before answering. Damien is different from those who came before him, she said finally. He has spent nearly his entire life searching for a way to break this pact, long before he ever met you. I do not say this to excuse his silence, Elena, only to offer you a piece of truth you deserve to have, alongside the terrible truth you already discovered today. Elena wanted to ask more, wanted details, proof, anything that might make the horror of what she had learned feel slightly less crushing, but exhaustion and grief had left her too drained to continue the conversation. Grace seemed to sense this, and after a moment, simply nodded and stepped back. Rest, if you can, she said gently. Damien will return tomorrow. Whatever happens between the two of you, I believe you deserve to hear the full truth from him directly, not pieced together from old books and frightened whispers. Elena closed the door once Grace had gone, and though sleep felt impossible with everything churning inside her, exhaustion eventually won out, pulling her under into restless dreams filled with painted eyes and closing doors. Damien returned late the following afternoon, and Elena felt the shift in the household the moment his carriage arrived, a kind of held breath running through the staff as word spread that the Alpha was home. She waited for him in the library, unable to bring herself to seek him out in a more private setting, needing the space and formality of the room to keep her composure intact. He found her there within the hour, and the moment he stepped through the doorway, Elena saw immediately that he already knew. Marcus must have told him, or perhaps he simply read the truth in her expression, in the careful distance she had placed between them, in the way she did not rise to greet him as she had begun to in recent weeks. "Elena," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Everything I read in that study, the binding pact, the renewal, all of it." Damien's shoulders sagged, the careful composure he wore like armor finally cracking under the weight of the moment. "Yes," he said simply. "It is true." Hearing him confirm it directly, without excuses or deflection, hurt more than Elena expected, a fresh wave of betrayal crashing through her, despite already knowing the answer. "You let me believe we were building something real," she said, her voice breaking. "You let me care about you, knowing this entire time that I was nothing more than a countdown to you, a price to be paid." "That is not true," Damien said, moving to over her, though he stopped himself when she stepped back, giving her the distance she clearly needed. "Elena, please believe me. What has grown between us these past weeks, that has been entirely real. I did not plan for it. I did not want it, if I am honest, because I knew from the very beginning what this arrangement was meant to cost you, and I did not want to make that cost harder to bear by allowing myself to feel something for you." "And yet you did," Elena said. "And yet I did," Damien admitted, pain evident in every line of his face. "I have spent my entire life since I was a boy, searching for a way to end this pact, Elena. My father paid this price with my mother, when I was too young to understand what was truly happening. I watched him grieve her for the rest of his life, trapped by a tradition he despised but felt powerless to break. I swore to myself I would find another way, before it became my turn to continue this cycle." "And have you?" Elena asked, some desperate hope flickering despite everything. "Found another way?" Damien's expression grew heavier, exhaustion and frustration evident beneath the careful control he usually maintained. "Not yet," he admitted. "I have searched every old text in that study, consulted with those who study such pacts, followed every lead I could find. I believed, when your father came to me with his debts, that perhaps this was simply the fate I could not escape. But then I met you, and something in me refused to accept that any longer. I have continued searching every single day since our wedding, hoping to find some answer before the year is out." Elena studied him carefully, wanting desperately to believe him, though the wound of his silence still ached fresh and raw. "You should have told me from the beginning," she said. "I deserved the chance to decide for myself, knowing the full truth, rather than discovering it hidden in old books and locked rooms." "You are right," Damien said, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. "I was a coward, Elena. I told myself I was protecting you from unnecessary fear while I searched for a solution, but the truth is, I was protecting myself from watching you look at me the way you are looking at me right now." The raw honesty in his admission cracked something in Elena's chest, anger and hurt tangled together with a stubborn thread of compassion she could not fully suppress. "How much time do we have?" she asked finally, forcing herself to focus on practical matters rather than the storm of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "A little over 8 months," Damien said quietly, "until the anniversary of our wedding." 8 months. Elena turned the number over in her mind, trying to grasp the reality of it, a deadline hanging over her life that she had not even known existed until yesterday. "Then we have 8 months to find another way," she said, surprising herself with the determination in her own voice. Damien looked at her with something between hope and disbelief. "You would still help me search, after everything you learned today?" "I did not agree to this marriage, simply to die for a tradition I never consented to," Elena said, straightening her shoulders, despite the fear still churning in her stomach. I have 8 months, Damien. I intend to use every single one of them fighting for a different outcome, whether you help me or not. I will help you, Damien said immediately, something fierce and determined replacing the exhaustion in his eyes. I swear to you, Elena, I will use every resource, every connection, every hour I have, to find a way to break this pact before it comes to that. You have my word, and this time, I intend to prove that my word means something. Elena held his gaze for a long moment, weighing the fragile trust beginning to rebuild itself despite everything that had shattered between them that day. Then we start tomorrow, she said, together. No more secrets, Damien. Whatever we find, whatever we have to face, I want to know everything from now on. Everything, Damien agreed. I promise you that. It was not forgiveness, not yet, and Elena knew the road ahead would require more honesty and trust than either of them had yet managed to build. But as she looked at the man standing before her, a man burdened by generations of tradition he had never wanted, fighting against a fate that threatened to claim her life the same way it had claimed his mother's, something shifted inside her, a stubborn refusal to accept this as an ending she could not change. 8 months remained. And Elena intended to spend every single one of them fighting for a future neither the old books nor the painted portraits in that forbidden hallway had ever imagined possible. The weeks that followed transformed the quiet, careful rhythm of the Blackwood estate into something entirely different. Where Elena had once wandered the halls alone, uncertain of her place within them, she now spent long hours in the East Wing study, alongside Damien, surrounded by old books and scattered notes, both of them searching for any thread of hope buried within generations of family history. Their relationship had changed too, shifting into something more honest, if still fragile. The easy warmth they had begun building before her discovery had not disappeared entirely, but it now carried a weight of caution, a mutual understanding that trust, once broken, needed to be rebuilt carefully, piece by piece, through consistent honesty rather than empty promises. "Tell me about your mother," Elena said one evening, as they sat together at the study desk, surrounded by open volumes that had so far offered little but frustration. Damien looked up, surprised by the question, though he did not deflect it as she half expected him to. "Her name was Catherine," he said quietly. "She was kind, in a way that seemed almost too gentle for this world. My father loved her deeply, more than duty ever seemed to require, and I believe that love made her loss even harder for him to bear when the time finally came." "How old were you?" Elena asked gently. 7, Damien said. "Old enough to remember her laugh, but too young to fully understand what was happening when they told me she was gone. My father changed after that. He became harder, more distant, consumed by grief he never allowed himself to properly express. I think, in some ways, he never forgave himself for allowing tradition to take her from him, even though he told himself for years that he had no other choice." "Did he search for a way to break the pact?" Elena asked. "Briefly," Damien said, "but my father was not a man built for patience or research. He grieved, and then he threw himself entirely into leading the pack, using his pain as fuel rather than allowing it to guide him toward answers. By the time I was old enough to understand what truly happened to my mother, I promised myself I would do things differently, should the day ever come that I found myself facing the same fate." Elena reached across the desk, resting her hand gently over his, a small gesture that nonetheless carried significant weight, given how carefully they had both been guarding their emotions since her discovery. "We will find something," she said. "I believe that, Damien. We simply have not looked hard enough yet." Their research continued in earnest over the following weeks, though progress came slowly and painfully. They discovered that the pact had been formed generations ago, born from a desperate agreement made by an early Blackwood Alpha during a time of great danger, when the pack faced near destruction from rival forces determined to claim their territory. The pact had granted extraordinary strength in exchange for the price that continued to this day, a bargain struck in desperation that had somehow calcified into unbreakable tradition over the centuries that followed. "There has to be a loophole," Elena insisted one night, poring over an old text that described the original ritual in painstaking detail. "Every pact like this has some kind of condition, some specific requirement that might be avoided or fulfilled differently. I have searched for exactly that for years," Damien said, exhaustion evident in his voice. Every text mentions the pact as absolute, unbreakable, requiring the same sacrifice each generation without exception. Then perhaps we need someone with more knowledge than these old books can offer, Elena said, an idea forming as she spoke. Someone who understands the true nature of magic, rather than simply the family's recorded history of it. Damien considered this for a long moment. There is a woman, he said slowly, as though reluctant to voice the thought aloud, living at the edge of our territory, in the deep forest. She is not part of any pack, not entirely human either, if the old stories are accurate. My father always warned against seeking her counsel, calling her dangerous and unpredictable. Your father also never found a way to break this pact, Elena pointed out. Perhaps his caution was misplaced. Damien's jaw tightened with the weight of the decision, but finally, he nodded. We will visit her, he said, tomorrow, if you are willing to make the journey. The following day, they set out together into the deep forest surrounding the estate, traveling far beyond the boundaries Elena had been warned never to cross. The trees grew thicker and older the further they walked, ancient trunks twisted into strange shapes, sunlight filtering down in fractured patterns that made the forest feel almost alive around them. They found the woman's cottage nestled deep within a small clearing, smoke curling from its chimney despite the mild afternoon air, as though the fire inside never truly went out. The woman who answered their knock was older than Elena expected, though her eyes held a sharpness that suggested age had done nothing to dull her mind. Damien Blackwood, she said, studying him with obvious recognition, though he had claimed never to have met her personally. I wondered when you might finally come. You know why we're here, Damien said. I know the pact your family carries, the woman said, her gaze shifting to Elena, studying her with an intensity that made Elena's skin prickle uncomfortably. And I know the young woman standing beside you carries its weight upon her wrist, whether she fully understands its meaning or not. Can it be broken? Elena asked directly, unwilling to waste time on careful diplomacy when her life hung in the balance. The woman's expression grew thoughtful, and she gestured for them to enter her small home, where herbs hung drying from the rafters, and old books lined every available surface. Every pact carries within it the conditions of its own undoing, she said, settling into a worn chair beside the fire. The question is rarely whether such conditions exist, but whether those bound by the pact are willing to pay whatever price breaking it demands. We are willing, Damien said immediately. The woman's sharp eyes moved between them, assessing something Elena could not quite name. The pact your ancestor formed was built upon sacrifice freely given for the protection of others, she said finally. Over generations, that original purpose has been forgotten, replaced by empty tradition, performed simply because it has always been performed. But the pact itself, I believe, still recognizes its original conditions, even if your family has long since stopped honoring them. What does that mean? Elena asked. It means the sacrifice must be freely chosen, not simply accepted out of obligation or fear, the woman said. And it means the purpose behind it must serve genuine protection, not simply the preservation of power for its own sake. If you can find a way to fulfill the pact's true original purpose without the loss of innocent life, I believe the binding itself may release its hold. How? Damien asked, leaning forward with fierce intensity. What would fulfill that purpose without costing Elena her life? The woman was quiet for a long moment, studying the fire before answering. That, I cannot tell you, she said finally. The pact was forged by your family, and its true undoing must come from within your own bloodline, through choices only you and those you love can make. I can offer you only this guidance, and a warning alongside it. Not everyone within your pack will welcome the pact's ending, Damien Blackwood. Some have built their power and position upon its continuation. Tread carefully, and trust few, as you search for your answer. Elena felt a chill move through her at the woman's warning, thinking immediately of the careful, guilty expressions she had noticed among certain pack members since her arrival, wondering now which of them might resist any effort to break a tradition they had perhaps come to depend upon in ways she did not yet understand. They left the cottage with more questions than answers, though something had shifted in the desperate hope Elena carried since discovering the truth in that forbidden study. A path forward existed, however unclear its exact shape remained. The pact could be broken if they were willing to find its true original purpose and fulfill it through genuine sacrifice rather than empty tradition. The question now was simply how, and how much time they truly had before the answer needed to be found. Back at the estate, Elena and Damien threw themselves into understanding the witch's words, poring over family records with fresh eyes, searching now for the original purpose behind the pact, rather than simply its mechanics. They discovered old accounts describing the desperate circumstances under which the first Blackwood Alpha had made his bargain, a time when the pack faced complete destruction from a rival group determined to claim their territory through violence and cruelty toward everyone who stood in their way. The original sacrifice protected the entire pack from destruction, Elena said, piecing together fragments from several different texts spread across the study desk. Real danger, real protection. Not simply tradition performed, because it has always been performed. Then perhaps that is our answer, Damien said, though frustration colored his voice. We need to find genuine danger facing the pack, and address it through sacrifice freely chosen, rather than continuing this hollow tradition that has lost its true meaning. But we cannot simply invent a crisis to solve, Elena pointed out. The witch said the purpose had to be genuine. Their search continued over the following weeks, though the pressure of their limited time weighed increasingly heavy on both of them. Elena noticed changes within the pack as their investigation continued, subtle shifts in behavior among certain members, conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered rooms, glances exchanged between individuals she had not previously seen interact closely. She mentioned her concerns to Damien one evening, describing the pattern she had noticed, and his expression grew troubled. Marcus has been distant lately, he admitted. I assumed it was simply the stress of managing pack affairs, while my attention has been consumed by our search. But perhaps there is more to it. The witch warned us that some within the pack might resist any effort to end the pact, Elena reminded him. Perhaps we should be more careful about who knows the true purpose of our search. Damien nodded slowly, clearly troubled by the possibility that his own Beta, a man he had trusted since childhood, might harbor reservations about breaking the tradition that had shaped their entire family history. I will speak with him, he said, carefully, and without revealing more than necessary, until I understand where his loyalties truly lie. Their conversation with Marcus, when it finally happened, revealed exactly the complication the witch had warned them about. Marcus admitted, with visible discomfort, that he believed the pact served an important purpose, beyond simple tradition, that the strength it granted the pack had protected them from real threats over generations, threats that continued to exist in the present day, even if they were less visible than the original danger that had prompted the pack's creation. There are rival packs who would move against us the moment they sensed weakness, Marcus said, his expression serious and genuinely concerned rather than malicious. The strength this pact provides is not simply symbolic, Damien. It has kept us safe for generations. I understand your desire to spare Elena, truly I do, but I fear the consequences of breaking something that has protected so many people for so long. There must be another way to maintain that protection, Elena said, frustrated but trying to understand his perspective. One that does not require an innocent life every generation. I hope you find it, Marcus said, and Elena believed his sincerity, even as she recognized the danger his hesitation might pose to their efforts. But I would ask you both to be certain before you act, rather than risk the safety of everyone in this pack based on hope alone. The conversation left both Elena and Damien troubled, aware now that even those who cared for them might resist their efforts if they believed the pack's ending would genuinely endanger the pack's safety. Their search took on renewed urgency after that, driven now by the need to find not just a way to break the pact, but a genuine alternative source of protection that could replace what the pact currently provided. It was Elena, several nights later, who finally noticed a detail buried within one of the oldest texts they had yet examined, a passage describing the original Alpha's bargain, in language slightly different from every other account they had read. Listen to this, she said, reading aloud from the fragile yellowed pages. The bargain was struck not simply for strength, but for unity, binding the pack together under leadership strong enough to protect what scattered clans could not defend alone. The sacrifice given was not merely of life, but of division, as separate families joined together under a single banner for the first time in the region's history. Damien looked up sharply. Unity, he repeated, not simply strength. What if the true purpose was never simply about power? Elena continued, excitement building despite her exhaustion. but about bringing scattered, vulnerable groups together, under strong, unified protection. What if fulfilling that original purpose again, in a new way suited to our current circumstances, might satisfy the pack's true conditions? There are smaller, weaker packs throughout our territory, Damien said slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. Groups who struggle to protect themselves against larger threats, who might benefit enormously from formal alliance and protection under Blackwood's strength, in exchange for their loyalty and support, strengthening our own position in turn. A true alliance, Elena said. Built on genuine partnership and mutual protection, rather than simple domination or empty tradition. Hope flickered between them, fragile but real, the first genuine possibility they had discovered since beginning their desperate search. They spent the following days developing the idea further, identifying smaller packs within Blackwood territory who might welcome formal alliance, considering how such unity might be formally established, in a way that honored the pack's original purpose. But even as their hope grew, Elena could not shake the memory of Marcus's troubled expression, the genuine fear in his voice when he spoke of the dangers facing their pack. She began paying closer attention to him after that conversation, noticing the way he seemed increasingly withdrawn, spending long hours in private conversation with other senior pack members, conversations that stopped whenever Elena or Damien approached. Something was shifting within the pack's leadership, something Elena could not fully identify but sensed with growing unease, a current of resistance building beneath the surface of polite cooperation that had characterized her relationship with most pack members since her wedding day. She mentioned her concerns to Grace one afternoon, hoping the older woman's long experience within the household might offer some insight into what she was sensing. There are those who have built their position within this pack around the strength the pact provides, Grace said carefully, her expression troubled. Marcus among them, though I do not believe his concerns come from selfish motivation. He genuinely fears for the pack's safety, Elena, and fear can make even good men act in ways they might otherwise avoid. Do you think he would try to stop us? Elena asked directly. Grace hesitated before answering, her expression grave. I think, she said slowly, that you and Damien should proceed carefully and quickly, before fear convinces anyone that stopping you matters more than respecting the choice that should rightfully belong to the two of you alone. Elena carried Grace's warning with her over the following days, watching Marcus and the other senior pack members with new wariness, even as she and Damien continued developing their plan for genuine alliance with the smaller packs throughout their territory. Time was running short, both for the pack's approaching deadline and, Elena feared increasingly, for whatever resistance might be building quietly within their own household walls. Whatever answer they had found, whatever hope had finally emerged from months of desperate searching, Elena understood now that reaching it safely would require more than simply solving an ancient puzzle. It would require surviving whatever opposition their own pack might raise against them, before that opposition had the chance to act. Damien moved carefully in the weeks that followed, reaching out to the leaders of smaller packs scattered throughout Blackwood territory, with quiet diplomacy, testing the waters of formal alliance before committing to anything that might expose their plan too early to those within his own household, who seemed increasingly resistant to change. Elena accompanied him whenever possible, learning names and faces, listening to the concerns of pack leaders who had lived for generations under the protection Blackwood's strength provided, often at the cost of their own independence. A young pack leader named Oliver, overseeing a small group along the eastern border, proved particularly receptive to their proposal. His people had suffered repeated threats from rival packs beyond the border, threats his own limited numbers struggled to fully repel. The idea of formal alliance with Blackwood's strength, offered not through domination but genuine partnership, appealed to him immediately. We would welcome such an alliance, Oliver said, during a careful meeting held away from Blackwood Estate, in a location Damien had chosen specifically to avoid drawing attention from anyone within his own pack who might report their activities. Though I confess, I am curious why the offer comes now, after generations of the Blackwood family maintaining strict separation from smaller packs like ours. Circumstances have changed, Damien said carefully. I believe true strength comes not from isolation, but from genuine unity, among those who share this territory, and its dangers. Oliver studied him for a long moment, clearly sensing there was more to the story than Damien was willing to share directly, but he did not press further, seemingly satisfied simply that the offer itself was genuine and beneficial to his people. Similar conversations followed with two other smaller packs over the following weeks, each cautiously optimistic about the alliance Damien proposed, each unaware of the true stakes driving his sudden interest in unity after generations of Blackwood isolation. Elena found herself growing hopeful as their plan took shape, formal agreements drafted, terms discussed, a genuine framework for mutual protection and support beginning to emerge from what had started as a desperate, uncertain idea. But even as their plan progressed, the tension within Blackwood Estate continued building in ways that grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Elena noticed Marcus watching her and Damien with growing suspicion whenever they returned from their careful, secretive meetings, his expression tight with concern he no longer bothered fully hiding. One evening, he confronted them directly, his patience apparently exhausted. "You are planning something," he said, blocking their path as they entered the estate after another meeting with Oliver's people. "I have noticed the pattern, Damien. Secretive travels, careful silence about your destinations, hurried conversations that stop whenever I approach. Tell me what you are doing, before I am forced to assume the worst." Damien's expression grew guarded, though Elena could see the internal struggle playing out behind his careful composure, torn between his desire for honesty and his awareness of the danger Marcus's resistance might pose to their plan. "We are exploring alternatives," he said finally, choosing his words with obvious care. "Ways to protect this pack that do not require the price we have paid for generations. By allying with weaker packs who cannot possibly offer the strength this pact provides?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising with genuine alarm. "Damien, think carefully about what you are risking. If this alliance fails to provide adequate protection, if the pack's power fades before you have found something to truly replace it, you will be endangering everyone in this pack, not simply satisfying your own desire to spare one woman's life." "Elena's life matters," Damien said, his own voice hardening with barely controlled anger. "As much as any life within this pack." "I did not say it does not matter," Marcus said, though his tone suggested frustration rather than full agreement. "I am simply asking you to consider the full weight of what you risk, before you act rashly, based on feelings that, however genuine, may be clouding your judgment about matters affecting far more than the two of you alone." The confrontation ended without resolution, both men retreating to their respective positions, though the tension between them lingered heavily in the air, long after Marcus finally walked away. Elena felt the weight of his warning settle uncomfortably in her chest, aware that his concerns, however frustrating, came from genuine care for the pack's safety, rather than simple cruelty toward her personally. "Do you think he's right to worry?" she asked Damien later that night, unable to fully shake her unease. "I think," Damien said slowly, "that Marcus has spent his entire life believing this pact represents our only true source of safety. Convincing him otherwise will require more than simply proposing an alternative. It will require proving that alternative genuinely works, before he trusts it enough to accept the pack's ending." "And if we cannot prove it in time?" Elena asked, the question that had been haunting her thoughts for weeks finally spoken aloud. Damien's expression grew heavy with the same fear Elena carried. "Then we will need to find another way to convince him," he said, "or accept the risk of moving forward regardless of his objections." Their alliance plan continued developing over the following weeks. Formal agreements finalized with all three smaller packs. A ceremony planned to formally establish the new unity between their territories, timed carefully to fall before the pack's approaching deadline. Elena allowed herself, cautiously, to hope that they had truly found the answer they needed, that the genuine protection this new alliance provided might satisfy whatever ancient conditions the ancient pact required for its ending. But 3 days before the alliance ceremony was scheduled to take place, Elena woke in the middle of the night to the sound of raised voices echoing through the estate, urgent and alarmed, in a way that immediately sent fear racing through her chest. She rose quickly, wrapping a robe around herself, and hurried toward the sound, finding Damien already standing in the main hallway, his expression grim as he listened to a breathless messenger delivering urgent news. Elena asked, joining them. Damien's jaw tightened before he answered, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of dread that made Elena's stomach drop. "Marcus is gone," he said, along with several senior pack members who share his concerns. The messenger believes they have gone to warn the Alliance ceremony guests, and perhaps worse, to disrupt the ceremony entirely before it can take place. Why would they do that? Elena asked, though some part of her already understood the terrible logic behind such a desperate action. Because Marcus believes, with complete sincerity, that stopping this alliance protects everyone he cares about, Damien said, even if it means stopping us by force. Elena felt cold fear settle into her bones, as the full weight of the situation became clear. Whatever hope they had built over the past months, whatever fragile plan they had developed to save her life while genuinely protecting the pack Marcus loved so fiercely, now stood in immediate, desperate danger, threatened not by some ancient magical force, but by the very people who had once seemed like allies within their own household. "We need to reach the ceremony site before he does," Damien said, already moving toward the door, urgency replacing his usual careful composure. "Elena, I need you to come with me. Whatever happens next, I do not want to face it without you beside me." Elena did not hesitate, following him out into the cold night air, her heart pounding with fear for what awaited them, but also with a fierce, stubborn determination that had grown steadily within her since the day she first discovered the truth hidden behind those forbidden doors. She had come too far, fought too hard, to allow fear and misguided loyalty to destroy the fragile hope they had built together. Whatever confrontation awaited them at the ceremony site, Elena intended to face it standing firmly at Damien's side, fighting for the future they had both begun to believe, cautiously, and against all odds, might finally be within their reach. The ride toward the ceremony site felt endless, the dark forest rushing past in shadowed blurs, as Damien pushed the horses as fast as he safely could, Elena gripping the carriage seat with white knuckles, her mind racing through every possible outcome awaiting them. She thought of Oliver and the other pack leaders who had trusted Damien's offer of genuine alliance, wondering what Marcus intended to tell them, what fear or false information might unravel months of careful, hopeful work in a matter of moments. "What will he say to them?" Elena asked, breaking the tense silence that had settled between them since leaving the estate. "I don't know," Damien admitted, his knuckles equally white on the reins. "Marcus is not a cruel man, Elena. Whatever he says, whatever he does, I believe he genuinely believes he is protecting our people. That makes him more dangerous in some ways, not less. A man convinced of his own righteousness rarely hesitates the way someone acting from selfish motivation might." They arrived at the clearing where the ceremony was meant to take place, just as dawn began breaking over the horizon, pale light filtering through the trees, to reveal a scene that immediately confirmed Elena's worst fears. Marcus stood at the center of the clearing, surrounded by several senior Blackwood pack members, facing Oliver and the other smaller pack leaders, who had arrived early to help prepare for the formal ceremony. Voices rose in confusion and alarm as Damien and Elena's carriage came to a hurried stop at the clearing's edge. "Marcus," Damien called out, moving quickly toward the gathered group, "whatever you have told them, stop now, before this goes any further." "I have told them the truth," Marcus said, turning to face him, his expression a mixture of defiance and genuine anguish. "That this alliance is built upon an unproven theory, that you are willing to gamble the safety of everyone in this pack, and perhaps everyone in theirs as well, based on a desperate hope born from your feelings for one woman, rather than sound judgment for the good of the many." "That is not fair," Elena said, stepping forward despite the fear tightening her chest. "We have spent months researching this alternative, consulting those with genuine knowledge of the pack's true nature. This is not simply desperate hope, Marcus. It is a genuine, carefully considered path forward." "Carefully considered by two people whose judgment is compromised by exactly the kind of feelings that make such decisions dangerous," Marcus shot back, though Elena noticed genuine pain beneath his harsh words, the anguish of a man caught between loyalty to his alpha and fear for everyone he had sworn to protect. Oliver stepped forward then, his expression troubled as he looked between Damien and Marcus, clearly uncertain what to believe amid the conflicting claims. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "it would help if someone explained clearly, right now, exactly what circumstances have led to this alliance being proposed in the first place. I confess, I have wondered from the beginning why such an offer came so suddenly, after generations of Blackwood isolation." Damien hesitated, glancing at Elena, and she recognized the same struggle she had witnessed weeks earlier, the desire for honesty warring against fear of consequences. But she thought of everything they had already survived by choosing truth over secrecy, and she nodded slightly, encouraging him to share what remained. "There is an ancient pact within my family," Damien said finally, his voice carrying clearly across the tense clearing, "one that has required a terrible price each generation, a price that would soon fall upon my wife, unless we can find a genuine alternative that fulfills the pact's true original purpose. This alliance is not simply a diplomatic gesture, Oliver. It represents our best hope of ending that price permanently, while genuinely strengthening protection for everyone within these territories, not simply my own pack alone." Silence fell over the clearing as Damien's words settled, Oliver's expression shifting from confusion to a complicated mixture of sympathy and concern. Marcus, too, seemed momentarily thrown off balance by the direct honesty he clearly had not expected. "You never told me this was the true reason," Marcus said quietly, some of the fierce defiance draining from his voice. "I was trying to protect you from a decision you did not need to carry," Damien said. "Just as I once tried, wrongly, to protect Elena from a truth she deserved to know from the beginning. I see now that secrecy, however well-intentioned, only breeds fear and misunderstanding, Marcus. I should have trusted you with the full truth from the start." Marcus's expression wavered, old loyalty and genuine affection for the Alpha he had served since childhood, clearly warring against his deep-seated fear for the pack's safety. "Even knowing this," he said slowly, "how can you be certain this alliance will truly satisfy whatever ancient conditions this pact requires? What if you are wrong, Damien, and Elena's sacrifice becomes necessary regardless, only now with the added risk of weakened protection from a plan that failed to work as you hoped?" "I cannot be completely certain," Damien admitted, and Elena admired the raw honesty in his answer, even knowing it might not be what Marcus wanted to hear. "But I know this, Marcus. I refuse to accept Elena's death as a foregone conclusion, simply because tradition demands it, without first exhausting every possible alternative. If this alliance fails to satisfy the pact, I will continue searching for another answer, for as long as time allows me to search. What I will not do is stand by and let ancient tradition claim another innocent life without a genuine fight against it." Elena watched Marcus's expression shift slowly, the fierce conviction that had brought him to this clearing, beginning to crack under the weight of Damien's genuine determination and honesty. Oliver, too, seemed moved by the exchange, stepping closer with an expression of quiet resolve. "For what it's worth," Oliver said, addressing Marcus directly, "my people have suffered real danger for generations, danger that Blackwood's strength could genuinely help address. Whatever ancient pact drives this alliance forward, the protection it offers my people is real and desperately needed. I would ask you to consider that this alliance might serve genuine good, regardless of the deeper reasons behind its creation." Marcus stood silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with everything he had just heard, the fierce certainty that had driven him to disrupt the ceremony, now tangled with new understanding, and old loyalty finally winning through his fear. Finally, his shoulders sagged, and he looked at Damien with something that resembled genuine apology. "I still fear the risk," he said quietly, "but I see now that my fear led me to act rashly, without giving you the chance to prove your judgment sound. I am sorry, Damien, for doubting you so completely, and for nearly destroying something that might genuinely help protect everyone. This pack is sworn to defend." "Your fear came from loyalty," Damien said, extending his hand toward his old friend. "I cannot fault you for that, even if your actions this morning nearly cost us everything we have worked toward. Will you stand with us now, and help ensure this alliance succeeds as we all hope it will?" Marcus studied the offered hand for a long moment before finally accepting it, old friendship and loyalty reasserting themselves over the fear that had driven him to this desperate confrontation. "I will," he said, "and I will pray, alongside you both, that this proves enough to spare Elena the fate every bride before her has faced." The ceremony proceeded that morning as originally planned, delayed only slightly by the tense confrontation that had nearly derailed it entirely. Elena stood beside Damien as formal alliance was declared between Blackwood territory and the three smaller packs who had agreed to join under mutual protection and genuine partnership, a unity built not on domination but on shared strength and support, exactly as the ancient texts had described the pack's original, forgotten purpose. As the final words of the ceremony were spoken, Elena felt something shift, subtle but unmistakable, a strange warmth moving through the bracelet on her wrist, gone as quickly as it appeared. She glanced at Damien, wondering if he had felt anything similar, and found him watching her with the same cautious, desperate hope reflected in his eyes. They would not know immediately whether their efforts had truly satisfied the ancient pact's conditions, whether the price hanging over Elena's life had genuinely been lifted through this new, honest alliance built on trust rather than empty tradition. But as Elena looked around the clearing, at Marcus standing firmly beside them now rather than against them, at Oliver and the other pack leaders celebrating the beginning of genuine partnership between their people, she allowed herself, for the first time in months, to believe that perhaps they had finally found their way toward a future neither ancient tradition nor desperate fear had ever thought possible. The months following the alliance ceremony passed with a strange, cautious quality unlike anything Elena had experienced since her arrival at Blackwood Estate. Where fear and uncertainty had once colored nearly every day, a fragile hope now settled over the household instead, though neither Elena nor Damien allowed themselves to fully relax until the anniversary of their wedding finally approached, bringing with it the answer they had waited so desperately to learn. The alliance itself had already begun proving its worth, in ways that extended far beyond the ancient pact hanging over Elena's life. Oliver's people successfully repelled a border incursion that would have overwhelmed them without Blackwood's support, the combined strength of the newly unified territories proving more than capable of the protection each pack had once struggled to provide alone. Marcus, true to his word, threw himself fully into supporting the alliance, his early doubts transforming gradually into genuine enthusiasm as he witnessed its benefits firsthand. "I confess," he told Elena one afternoon, as they walked together through the estate gardens, "I never expected to feel such relief at being wrong about something I once feared so deeply." Elena smiled, genuine warmth replacing the wariness she had once felt toward him. "I think we were both wrong about a great many things when this all began," she said. "I am simply glad we found our way to something better before it was too late." "Do you believe it worked?" Marcus asked. "The pact, I mean. Do you believe the alliance has truly satisfied its conditions?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know for certain," she admitted, "but I believe we did everything within our power to fulfill its true original purpose, rather than simply accepting the empty tradition it had become. Whatever happens when the anniversary arrives, I know we searched for a better answer with everything we had." As the final weeks before the anniversary approached, Elena noticed subtle changes she could not fully explain. The bracelet on her wrist, once heavy with an almost imperceptible hum of energy, now felt lighter somehow, though she could not say with certainty whether this was truly happening, or simply her own hopeful imagination influencing her perception. Damien, too, seemed to notice something shifting, spending long hours once again in the East Wing study, though now his research carried a different quality, searching for confirmation rather than desperate solutions. "The old texts describe a sign," he told Elena one evening, several days before their anniversary finally arrived. "Something that would indicate whether the pact's conditions had truly been satisfied, though the descriptions are frustratingly vague about exactly what form this sign might take." "Then we will simply have to wait and see," Elena said, though nervous anticipation churned constantly beneath her outward calm as the date drew closer. The anniversary of their wedding arrived on a clear, bright morning, sunlight streaming through the estate's tall windows, in a way that felt almost deliberately symbolic after months of uncertainty and quiet fear. Elena woke early, unable to sleep further despite her exhaustion, and found Damien already awake beside her, watching her with an expression that mixed hope and lingering fear in equal measure. "Today is the day," he said quietly. "Today is the day," Elena agreed, reaching for his hand, drawing strength from the steady warmth of his fingers closing around hers. They spent the morning together in the East Wing study, surrounded by the same old books and scattered notes that had consumed so much of their time over the past year, waiting for whatever sign the ancient texts had promised would confirm their fate one way or another. As the sun climbed higher, Elena felt the tension building steadily in her chest, every small sound in the house causing her heart to leap with anxious anticipation. It was Damien who noticed the change first, his sharp eyes catching something Elena had missed entirely. "Elena," he said, his voice tight with sudden emotion, Look at your wrist. Elena glanced down and felt her breath catch entirely. The bracelet, which had remained fastened securely around her wrist since the day Damien first placed it there, now hung loose and open, as though the clasp had simply released itself. The intricate silver symbols that once seemed to hum with quiet energy, now still and silent, nothing more than ordinary metal. Is it? Elena began, hardly daring to voice the hope building rapidly within her chest. I believe so, Damien said, his voice thick with emotion he no longer bothered hiding. I believe the pact has been satisfied, Elena. I believe you are finally, truly free. Tears filled Elena's eyes as the weight of the past year finally began lifting from her shoulders, months of fear and desperate searching giving way at last to genuine, overwhelming relief. Damien pulled her into his arms, and she allowed herself, for the first time since discovering the terrible truth hidden in that forbidden study, to simply feel joy, without the shadow of impending loss hanging over it. We did it, she whispered against his chest. We actually did it. You did it, Damien said, pulling back slightly to look at her, his expression filled with a love he no longer needed to hide behind careful distance and guarded secrets. Your strength, your refusal to simply accept the fate that had claimed every bride before you, that is what truly broke this pact, Elena. I merely helped carry the search forward alongside you. Word spread quickly through the estate that morning, and by afternoon, the household had transformed into something resembling genuine celebration, staff and pack members alike sharing in the relief and joy that had settled over Blackwood Estate after generations of quiet grief and fear. Marcus found Elena in the garden that evening, his expression warm with genuine happiness as he offered his congratulations. I am glad to have been wrong, he said, smiling in a way Elena had rarely seen from him during her earlier months at the estate. Truly, deeply glad. As am I, Elena said, returning his smile easily. That evening, as the celebration continued throughout the estate, Damien found Elena standing alone near the edge of the gardens, watching the sun set in brilliant colors over the forest that had once seemed so full of danger and secrets, now simply beautiful in the fading evening light. A year ago, he said, joining her, I brought you into this house not knowing whether I could ever offer you anything beyond fear and eventual loss. I am grateful beyond words that we found our way to something entirely different instead. A year ago, Elena said, turning to face him, I married a stranger to save my family. Terrified of what that choice might truly cost me, I never imagined I would find something real, something worth choosing freely, rather than simply accepting out of necessity. And now? Damien asked, searching her face with quiet hope. Now, Elena said, smiling as she reached for his hand. I choose to stay, Damien, not because tradition demands it, not because my family's safety requires it, but because I want to build a future with you, freely and completely, exactly as it should have been from the very beginning. Damien's answering smile carried the same relief and joy Elena felt blooming within her own chest, and as they stood together watching the last light fade over the territory they had fought so hard to protect, Elena finally allowed herself to believe fully in the future stretching out ahead of them, no longer shadowed by ancient secrets or looming deadlines, but open and bright with genuine possibility. The portraits still hung in the East Wing hallway, silent reminders of every bride who had come before her, women whose fates had been sealed by tradition they never had the chance to question or resist. But Elena's portrait, when it was eventually painted and hung alongside them, would tell a different story entirely. One of a woman who refused to simply accept the fate written for her, who fought instead to rewrite it completely, and who found, in the process, a love genuine enough to be chosen freely, rather than simply endured out of desperate necessity. Their story, unlike so many that came before it, was only just beginning.